In Unexpected Futurist, we profile the lesser-known futurist side of influential individuals. This episode's unexpected time traveler, Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, or as he's known to the world, Frederick Douglass.
Few evils are less accessible to the force of reason or more tenacious of life and power than a long-standing prejudice. It is a moral disorder which creates the conditions necessary to its own existence and fortifies itself by refusing all contradiction. As those who believe in the visibility of ghosts can easily see them, so it is always easy to see repulsive qualities in those we despise and hate.
Frederick Douglass was born a slave and was separated from his mother while still an infant, and yet by the time Douglass was in his late 30s, he was one of America's best-known orators, abolitionists, authors, and women's rights activists. His face and beard are iconic images in American history, but the incredible breadth of his vision for the future beyond the Civil War is less widely known. While still a slave, Douglass covertly taught himself to read and write, eventually going so far as to educate his fellow slaves, until a group of angry slaveholders put a stop to it. Having escaped from slavery in 1838, he gave himself a new last name, published a memoir, and traveled to Europe to prevent his former master from recapturing him. During the Civil War, he was a factor in slowly convincing Abraham Lincoln, who initially hoped that Douglass would support a plan that would resettle black Americans to Africa, to turn the War of Rebellion into an abolition war, a war that would abolish slavery forever and ensure that black men and women had a place in American society. In the years after the war, proposals to resettle black Americans in Africa continued to pop up, but Douglass was sure that African Americans would remain part of the United States, as he reiterated in a speech in 1884.
What the Negro was as a slave, we know. What he will be in his new relation to his fellow man, time and events will make clear. One thing, however, may safely be laid down as probable, and that is that the Negro, in one form and complexion or another, may be counted upon as a permanent element of the population of the United States. He is now 7 millions, has doubled his number in 30 years. The idea of his becoming extinct finds no support in this fact. But will he emigrate? No, individuals may, but the masses will not. Dust will fly, but the earth will remain.
Despite being an optimist about the long-term future, Douglass could also be a realist. He acknowledged, especially as civil rights progress stalled in the years after the war, that before things got better for black Americans, they would likely get worse. A view that was starkly illustrated by the striking down of the Civil Rights Act of 1875, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, and Jim Crow laws. But while many argued that American society would ultimately split into distinct black and white classes, Douglass argued that it should not, and in the long run could not, happen.
I do not think that the Negro will become more distinct as a class. Ignorant, degraded as he was during his 200 years of slavery, he was sufficiently attractive to make possible an intermediate race of 1 million more or less. If this has taken place in the fact of those odious barriers, what is likely to occur when the colored man becomes educated and prosperous? The tendency of the age is unification, not isolation, not to clans and classes, but to human brotherhood. It was once degradation intensified for a Norman to associate with a Saxon, but time and events have swept down the barriers between them, and Norman and Saxon have become Englishmen. The Jew was once despised and hated in Europe, and is so still in some parts of that continent, but he has risen and is rising to higher consideration, and no man is now degraded by association with him anywhere.
Today, Douglass's words here contain more meaning than he anticipated. While in many ways, he was correct in predicting the erosion of boundaries based on race, ethnicity, or family history in society, his words also foreshadow the grotesque violence that would ensue roughly 56 years later in the Holocaust. Though he stressed that he did not believe it would ever happen, Douglass admitted that in his darker moments he sometimes worried that a similar fate would befall black Americans in a sudden hysteria of violence. Douglass's faith that society was moving, if unevenly, in the right direction was not solely due to a simple faith in human nature. Even before the end of slavery, he saw technology as an important key towards making the world smaller and in making injustices more difficult to conceal. He was a fan of the then new invention of photography, and even gave speeches about its democratizing and truth-revealing potential. In 1848, a mere 10 years after escaping slavery, Douglass wrote in his newspaper, The North Star, about the impact he had seen from new technologies while traveling Europe.
Thanks to steam navigation and electric wires, we may almost hear the words uttered and see the deeds done. The revolution now cannot be confined to the place or the people where it may commence, but flashes with lightning speed from heart to heart, from land to land, till it has traversed the globe. The more we know, the more we want to know, and the more need we have of knowing.
Douglass noted the speed at which news of the recent French Revolution spread around the world, and the feelings of uncertainty it caused in distant places. He exulted that technology enabled him to find friends for his causes anywhere in the world. He was a proponent of the idea that civil rights movements should not be confined by boundaries. A few years later, Douglass delivered perhaps his most iconic speech, 1852's The 4th of July. The speech analyzed the 4th of July from a slave's point of view and the nation's failure to stop the expansion of slavery.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than any other days of the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he was the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future.
Despite being a sweeping condemnation of the nation's slave history, the closing moments of Douglass's 4th of July speech also refined his ideas on how technology could be an element in forging a better world.
Notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot around in the same old path of its fathers without interference. Long-established customs of hurtful character could formally fence themselves in and do their evil work with social impunity. Knowledge was then confined and enjoyed by the privileged few, and the multitude walked on in mental darkness. But a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. Space is comparatively annihilated.
In the years after the Civil War, much of Douglass's public time was spent fighting the resurgence of de facto slavery in the South, Douglass often writing in a withering tone.
The man in the South who says he is for lynch law because he honestly believes that the courts of the South are likely to be too merciful to the Negro charged with a crime either does not know the South or is fit for prison or an insane asylum.
But he continued throughout his life to speak on behalf of others, working for more universal education, equality in labor and equality for women, white and black.
It is painful to encounter stupidity as well as malice, but such is the fate of all who attempt to reform an abuse, to urge on humanity to nobler heights and illuminate the world with a new truth. The fact that woman has the power to say, I choose this rather than that, is all sufficient proof that there is no natural reason against the exercise of her power to vote. Usage, custom, and deeply rooted prejudices are against women's freedom. They have been against man's freedom, national freedom, religious freedom, but these will all subside in the case of women as well as elsewhere. The truth can hurt nothing which ought not to be hurt, and it alone can make men and women free.
Throughout his life, the many causes Frederick Douglass championed saw incredible breakthroughs and monumental setbacks. When he died in 1895, it was far from clear that the future would be an improved one for Black Americans, much less that his dream of an unprejudiced America could ever be achieved. But he never stopped working, or agitating, as he sometimes called it. And one common feature of his speeches continued to be the rousing call to action for everyone to work for an improved future.
We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. To all inspiring motives, to noble deeds which can be gained from the past, we are welcome. But now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work. You must do your work. We have as a people no past and very little present, but a boundless and glorious future. With us, it is not so much what has been or what is now, but what is to be in the good time coming.
If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe, and check out our other videos. Thanks for watching!